I was just traumatized. All that jazz that's going on down there and what our bodies are capable of doing. It is so beautiful. I just decided that I was kind of over this, which to me just felt inappropriate. Sorry, this is the part that's just gonna get TMI, but hello. I feel like I never do these chatty videos anymore, so it's always a bit strange. But today I am doing a video about my experience going off of the birth control pill 1 year later. I knew when I started on this journey, because believe me, it's a journey, that I would want to do this video eventually. And at the end of December into January, that's what kind of marks my 1 year of going off the pill. And so I wanted to share my experience. And I just want to note from the beginning that this video is going to be very long because there are a lot of different parts to this. I am going to timestamp this video with all the different sections. But I want this to be super informative. I personally watched so many of these videos before going off myself. I think that they can be so helpful. I know they helped me. And so I just wanted to share my own experience. If you guys have watched the vlogs, you know I've kind of touched on a lot of these aspects as I go through this journey, but I wanted to create just a summary of everything in a video itself. In the sections for this video, for one, I do want to share a disclaimer. I'm going to share why I went on the pill, why I went off the pill, my side effects after coming off, the doctor visits that I went to, how I'm regulating my cycle, because that's been a big part of my journey, books that I read, and then the form of birth control that we're using right now and why. So there are a lot of different sections. You can skip to what you want, but from the get-go, I just wanted to say, one, that I am not a doctor. I am not. So this is not medical advice. I do not want this video to be convincing you to go off or shaming anyone or any of that. That is not my purpose in doing this video. This is not medical advice. I'm not a doctor. I think we all have reasons for being on the pill, and I'm not here to shame. This is simply to share my own story and just the advice that I've gotten from my doctors. But ultimately, we are all unique beings and we all have reasons for doing the things that we do. So I just want to say that in the beginning. But to start, I wanted to share kind of my experience of going on the pill. So we're going to go back quite a bit ago to when I was 14 years old, because this is when I personally first got my period. I would always consider myself kind of a late bloomer. This was when I was going into my freshman year of high school. I believe it was the summer before. I felt like everyone had got theirs earlier than me. And so when I got mine, I was just traumatized to say the least, because my period, oh yeah, and also this is going to be TMI. We're going to be talking about a lot of very personal things. I mean, if you clicked on this video, we're talking about birth control. So you kind of know that, but my period was so heavy. I never expected to have just so much bleeding. I was going through like an ultra tampon every single hour. It was insane. And my period lasted a month. So this was something that I just hadn't really heard from my friends. I also have older sisters and they never had that experience. My mom never had that experience, but I just let it be what it was. And then my next period that I got wasn't until about 6 months later, and it was the exact same, if not worse. This time I know I had much more cramping, and again, it was lasting like a month at a time. At this point, I didn't want to keep going through this. I also was dealing with acne, and so I just had heard that birth control pills can clear your acne too. So I went to the gynecologist. I was put on birth control. For the most part, I would say that it helped in terms of my periods were not that heavy. I was on Natasia. It was a combination pill, and it for the most part kind of did what it said it would. I've dealt with acne my whole life, and so I think my acne cleared up for a little bit, but then it just came back again. I went on Accutane in high school. That's a whole nother journey. But when it came to my cycles and my periods, I thought that it regulated my period like I was told. And what I thought was a period, now I've learned that this is just withdrawal bleeding. When you're on the pill, it's not a real period. And if you actually look into the history of why you have withdrawal bleeding on the pill, it's actually kind of crazy. You can look it up yourself. It's just very interesting, but it's not technically a real period. But I just thought everything was kind of normal. Didn't really think twice about it until I was a sophomore in college. I, at this point, was not sexually active, and I just didn't feel like I needed to be on it. At this point, I had been on for years and years and just decided like, hey, I want to try to get off this and see what it actually looks like to have just a normal cycle. And so I went off, and it was traumatizing again. I will say that my bleeding was not nearly as heavy as it was before, but I had the most intense cramps far worse than I ever had before, and it was awful. I remember sitting in a college class and literally having to get up and leave class because it was so bad, and I just couldn't take it. I decided that this is not the time. I'm gonna go ahead and get back on the pill. So I went back on, and at this point, I don't know if anyone else was like this, but my insurance would randomly just stop covering my birth control, so I'd have to switch to the generic. And then later I learned that they were just switching me to totally different pills that weren't even combination pills, and so my body was just going through so many changes and fluctuations. I would say probably every year or so I would have to switch to a new pill. I don't know how common that is. And then when I got married, I did wait until marriage, and so I just figured this is working right now for a form of birth control. I'm not going to try to fix it, so I just stayed on when we got married too. And when I decided to go off for real this time, at this time I was 23 years old, and at this point Aiden and I had really talked about when we would ideally like to start trying for kids and, you know, wanting to enter that part of our journey. I just had this kind of feeling in the back of my mind that this was something that wasn't going to necessarily be easy for me. I don't know why. I just had this gut feeling that this was going to take me a while. I was in a place in my life where I felt like I had more time to really think about my cycle and to take more charge in it. No pun intended that this book is called Taking Charge of Your Fertility. I'll talk about this one later. And so I ended up finishing my pack of pills in December, and I just went off cold turkey, which I wouldn't necessarily recommend. There are ways to kind of support your body going through that. You can talk to your doctor about it, but I was just over it. I was so tired of being on it that I just completely went off. And so I wanted to share some of these side effects that I had because there are quite a few of them. And the first one was acne. Like I had mentioned, I've dealt with acne my whole life, so this was something that I expected, and this did happen the first time I tried to go off, but I just thought, you know, I'm just gonna take it, whatever it is, it'll happen for a couple months, then it'll be fine. And oh my goodness, my acne was so bad. Pretty much immediately when I went off in January, my skin flared up, especially in this area right here. I'll insert some photos. It was so bad, and I don't want this to scare you right now out of not going off for this reason, but I remember taking off my makeup and I hated getting in bed and just feeling not like myself, and I would cry in bed sometimes, and Aiden would like try to console me and be like, this is not as bad as you think, this is temporary, but it stinks. I totally relate to anyone dealing with bad acne. When you just look in the mirror and you don't even feel like yourself, you feel like everyone's looking at you. This was so bad, and mine I would say was pretty bad up until July. I still deal with acne though. My acne is not solved at all, and I don't even have any tips for this because I don't think that anything I did helped my acne. It was just in time regulating my cycle that helped a lot. I do think that taking my symbiotic, my probiotic, my prebiotic consistently has helped a lot. That's the one thing. I take seed, not sponsored, but I do think that that has helped a bit. And like I had mentioned, I have taken Accutane. I've taken every single drug you could probably mention for skin, and so I don't even want to take recommendations. I'm just at a point in my life where I'm trying to be more holistic in terms of looking at skin. And secondly, it was just having a very irregular cycle. And this has kind of been the biggest part of my journey because I went off at the end of December, like I mentioned, and I had some withdrawal bleeding in January, just like light spotting, but I didn't get my first period until April, I'm pretty sure. I didn't start tracking my cycles until July in my app, so I think it was April, but I will say that it was a very normal period. It was 7 days. I had a few days of just like a heavier bleed in the beginning, but then it lightened up just like it's supposed to. My cramps were pretty intense, I will say, but ever since then, each cycle they've gotten lighter and lighter in terms of the cramps. So we are getting much better, but yeah, that was my first one. And then I didn't get my period again until July. So these are really, really long cycles. Your cycle is supposed to be what, like 28 to 35 days is pretty average, and obviously everyone is different, and it's okay if it varies from that. And not that you can't conceive if you don't have a regular cycle, but sometimes you just have to have some extra help too. And a lot of times an irregular cycle can be a sign of PCOS or endometriosis, which I'll talk about later. And so it's just good to be aware of your cycle length. And just now in December, a year later, am I just now getting my cycle back more consistently? Right now I'm at like 40 days or so. So it's still not even technically normal, but this is the biggest reason why I wanted to do this video, because the amount of women that messaged me when I talked about this saying, I'm so thankful that you talked about this because I got off the pill thinking I'd be able to get pregnant 3 to 6 months later, and it has taken me 2 years because my cycle took forever to come back. And also, that's not for everyone. I've heard so many great stories of women who came off and immediately got pregnant or immediately got their cycle back, which I was hoping that would be me. It was not me in terms of getting my cycle back. And so I wanted to do this video in case you are also like me, to know that I also feel you and it's okay. And then lastly was just feeling my emotions more. I feel like when I was on the birth control pill, I always was just kind of numb. Like I didn't feel those highs and lows when women talked about PMSing and, oh, I just am craving chocolate, or I am just feeling kind of irritable or low energy. I just always kind of felt like the same. But now it is crazy how, depending on the cycle, and I will talk about cycle tracking and all that later on, depending on where I'm at, I feel so many different forms of being more energetic in some periods, or feeling more lower energy, or my libido being like crazy high at certain points. And I love that. That's one of the best things about this for me. It's made me so much more in tune with my body and kind of working to support my body in the best way by listening to those cues, and it's helped me just live a better life in that way. And so I'm really, really thankful for that. I'm thankful for the mood swings and all that, but those were most of my side effects that I had. So after about 6 months of being off the pill, this was in June, and I just wasn't getting my regular cycle, I decided to see my gynecologist because I had heard that it takes 3 to 6 months, but it's good to see a doctor if it's taking longer than that. And so I saw him, and originally when I went to this appointment, I didn't think twice about it, but kind of a week later, I just realized that I did not feel very validated in my concerns. I remember there was a comment when I talked about wanting to start trying for kids when we were 25. My doctor was like, "You're so young," and made a comment like that, which to me just felt inappropriate, regardless if I was wanting to or not. I don't think that's the place of my doctor to make a comment like that. And also at one point there was a mention of, if my cycle didn't go back to being regular, we can always put me back on the pill. And that was the direct quote, "put me back on the pill to regulate my cycle," which obviously didn't work the first time. And so I just felt very discouraged by that appointment. But instead of just kind of being resentful or whatever, he also just recommended waiting a little bit more time before doing tests. So I just felt like, I think I can start testing things now. I ended up seeing a new doctor. She was amazing. She did a lot of blood tests, just checking all my hormone levels, my thyroid, vitamin D, iron, all these things. I saw her in October, so I waited a little bit. At this point, it was 9 months after, and those tests were all perfectly clear. They were actually great. The only thing that was abnormal was my vitamin D, and it was extremely low. I would definitely recommend getting your vitamin D tested, not even just for this reason, for just your bone health, your energy levels. Vitamin D is so important. And I also asked her a lot about just PCOS, endometriosis, trying to see if this was something that may be a part of my story at this point. And she did not think so based off of my androgen levels. I believe that's how you pronounce it, because that's one of the markers. And PCOS, if you don't know, basically means that your ovaries are enlarged and they also have a lot of cysts. And then endometriosis is when the tissue lining on your uterus is actually growing inside the uterus instead of outside. And for PCOS, you have to meet 2 of the following criteria to be diagnosed. You have to have irregular ovulation, usually indicated by an irregular cycle, signs of increased androgen levels, which could be like hair loss, which I have dealt with, or a blood test confirming that you have these levels, and then also multiple small cysts on the ovaries. So you have to have 2 of those things to technically be diagnosed. But according to my doctor, my blood test, she said the hair loss that I was dealing with, she definitely thought it was more stress, which I'll talk about later. But I also ended up having an ultrasound done too, just for peace of mind, to make sure that I didn't have a lot of cysts or something that was more indicative of endometriosis. And that ultrasound was perfectly clear. I would definitely recommend, if you think that something is not right, pushing. Even just finding the vitamin D deficiency was so helpful. I think that has helped a lot in helping kind of get my period back. And so just don't let a doctor, anyone, try to make you feel stupid for asking questions about your body. I just always want to say that. And when I was talking about wanting to try for kids here soon, my doctor here, she recommended tracking my ovulation just to make sure, because I didn't have a regular cycle, to make sure my body was actually ovulating, which is what you need to have a baby. And so for that, she recommended just doing a lot of these ovulation strips. Now, when you have a regular cycle, it's much more obvious when you're ovulating, and you can use these. I think typically for like a cookie cutter cycle, it's on day 14 you typically ovulate. When you don't have a regular cycle, it's harder to tell. So she recommended using these. And these are basically like a pregnancy test that you stick in a cup of your pee. I've become much more in tune with this through doing fertility awareness method, which I will talk about at the end too. And I did discover through that my body does ovulate, which was great. So after figuring that out, she helps me realize that, for one, it just takes time. It takes time to get a regular cycle back, but also that there were some things that I could also do to help my body through this process. And that's what I want to talk about here, was just things that I've done, habits that I've been keeping up to help regulate my cycle. And first and foremost, the biggest thing has been eliminating stress. And this has been in a lot of different forms. And I just want to read this. I'll have this link too from an article down below, but it says, although some stress can be good and even help us challenge ourselves, too much can negatively impact health. The body is sensitive to any unexpected disruptions. Excessive worrying can put the digestive system into overdrive, causing stress symptoms like diarrhea, frequent urination, and also the female reproductive system can be affected too. In fact, for some women, stress may play a role in causing irregular or missed periods. As stress levels rise, there's a chance that your menstrual period will temporarily stop. And you can put your body under stress in a lot of different ways. For me, one thing that has helped a lot has just been gaining weight. Like, that's a very simple thing, but when you're not nourishing your body, it can be hard for your body to, menstruation takes energy, and your body's gonna cut out anything that doesn't necessarily need to be happening to protect you, because your body is in survival state. So I made a more intentional effort over the summer to just start eating more. I don't weigh myself consistently, but I can just tell by my clothes and everything that I definitely weigh probably like 5 to 10 pounds more than I used to. And that has been intentional, and that's not a bad thing, because I feel so much healthier now. And I know that that has been a big part, instead of skipping meals, which I wouldn't intentionally do, but I just wouldn't be mindful of, or now it's like a thing that I just have on my to-do list to nourish my body, eat good quality food, whole foods that make my body feel good, and also altering my workouts. If you guys watch my vlogs, you've been here for a while, you know that fitness is something I love. I, for a while, was doing very intensive HIIT cardio workouts at F45, which is a workout class. I've cut those out, and that's not to demonize cardio at all, but doing this intensive HIIT kind of cardio is not great if you're dealing with any sort of hormonal imbalance or trying to eliminate stress. I don't want to share like the exact science. I'll put something on the screen here, but doing those intensive HIIT workouts especially just isn't good if you're dealing with any sort of hormonal imbalance or anything like that. And this was actually something that my doctor told me too. She encouraged me just to implement more Pilates. She said swimming, yoga, these things are really good. And also cardio is not bad. Now I just try to do more stable cardio. I love to run, but I just keep things very stable. I'm not sprinting and stopping, but just, keeping things at a steady pace, and also not overdoing it with the workouts. At one point, you guys saw, this wasn't even that long ago, I would do 2 workouts in a day. If I was doing a strength workout at 45, I would go for a run in the morning, and that is just not a part of my game anymore. We do not do that. We do long walks, we do steady runs, and I think that this has dramatically helped through just regulating my cycle. Another thing that I did was try to implement more cycle syncing. So this is something that I learned a lot from this book, In the Flow. This is another great one. It says a 28-day plan working with your monthly cycle to do more and stress less. This actually made me really emotional. This taps into a lot of kind of reasons why we do things that we don't realize. And if you guys don't know what cycle syncing is, essentially it is matching your workouts according to what stage of your cycle you're in. And this is something that as my cycle becomes more regular, I'm trying to do this more, but essentially in your cycle you have 4 different stages. You have your follicular phase, and this is known as your body's spring. This phase begins on day 1 of your cycle and ends with ovulation. Your estrogen levels are low. You may find yourself feeling more tired than usual, and your energy levels will rise as you approach ovulation. So in this period, you definitely have more energy. It's a good time for higher intensity workouts, strength training. Since estrogen is still low at this point in your cycle, you don't need to worry about bloating or water retention or any of those things. And then you have your ovulatory phase, and this is when your hormone levels are at their peak. So you will likely have your highest energy levels during this time. This is the phase when your body is preparing for pregnancy, so your libido is at its highest. This phase is considered the summer phase. And then you have your luteal phase. This is considered the fall, and this phase begins after ovulation until the first day of menstruation. During your luteal phase, this is a time to kind of start dialing back the workouts, doing things more like strength training, yoga, Pilates. And then you have your menstrual phase, and this is obviously when you're menstruating, and this is good just to do very low impact, maybe just rest, chill out. And I think that that has helped a lot, just working more with my body. And then lastly, something I've been trying to do is just working less. I love my work. I love making the YouTube videos. I love creating the Instagram content, but something that I intentionally stopped doing, and I probably did not do in the best way because I just cut cold turkey, was stopping my podcast, because that was the thing that I would often do on the weekends. It was something that I would just not do things like reading or going on a date with Aiden or hanging out with friends, because that was a thing that I had to do on the weekends. And I just cut that out to kind of implement more free time for my body. And I think that that has helped. That's obviously not something that I love that I did. And I also wish that I did it in a more graceful way. And I'm still considering bringing my podcast back. But I just knew if I were to bring it back, I would definitely have to have help, because I couldn't just keep doing it all. You can't keep doing it all. We can't just run ourselves dead. I just stopped this video, but I just realized I forgot to mention a big part of limiting stress too was cutting out as much caffeine as I could. I still probably do 1 coffee a day, but I used to do 2, 3 coffees a day, but now I only do 1. I cut out afternoon coffee. I basically never have coffee afternoon. And if I do, it's decaf, which I know is technically not the best still, but that is also something that I think has helped with limiting stress. I've always been addicted to coffee, and I kind of had to check myself when it came to coffee addiction, and I think that that was helpful too. And now I just wanted to share some of the books that I read if you are considering embarking on this journey yourself, that I found to be very helpful. I've already mentioned a few of these. In the flow that I mentioned, this one says it presents a simple yet revolutionary 4-week solution to managing energy and time according to your female biochemistry. This groundbreaking program allows you to support your hormones, unlock creativity, and avoid burnout. And this is very just empowering. It made me like love being a woman. It made me love learning about my body. And yeah, this is a great book if you want to read that. I also read this. This is the Period Repair Manual, Natural Treatment for Better Hormones and Better Periods. If you're dealing with irregular cycles or very bad PMS or just uncomfortable periods, this can be a helpful book to read. And then lastly, this is like the big mama. This is a very intense read. Taking Charge of Your Fertility, the definitive guide to natural birth control, pregnancy achievement, and reproductive health. And this one is especially helpful if you are doing fertility awareness method, which is what we are doing now. I will share about this in a second. But also if you just want to learn about your body, I did not learn enough in health class. I didn't learn basically anything about my body. All I learned about was sex, but not about me personally. And I just think that this is so enlightening and so helpful, especially if you're trying to do cycle tracking and all of that. This is super helpful, which now brings us to the fertility awareness method, because if you are going off the pill, there's probably a great chance that you still are not wanting to conceive at this point. And so right now that is what we are doing. And if you don't know what the fertility awareness method is, I will share a little bit here. I do want to note that I was very comfortable embarking on using this method because I am at a place in my life right now. If I were to get pregnant, I would be overjoyed, because obviously this is something that is a lot more tedious. You have to be very meticulous. It can be very effective, but you also have to be very present, especially if you were just trying not to get pregnant. So if I was not super careful about taking my temperature, if I was off a little bit on my tracking, to me it's okay, because if I were to get pregnant and this did not necessarily work 100% because of me not being super detail oriented, I'm totally okay with that. So I just want to put that in there. I think it's very important to mention that. The fertility awareness method involves paying close attention to your menstrual cycle and identifying your most fertile days each month. If you use this method to avoid pregnancy, you track your fertility and avoid unprotected sex when you're ovulating. And there are a few different components. So one is tracking your cervical mucus, which I'll talk about, taking your basal body temperature, and then you can also use these ovulation strips like I mentioned earlier, and then just tracking your cycle in an app. So for me, the app that I use is called Pre-Mom, and this is actually the app that my ovulation stick said to use, and so I just started using this, but this is great. I really like it. There are a ton out there. I know Flow has one. I know there are so many on the market. And in here, this app is great because you can exactly track your period. You can track when you're ovulating, your basal body temperature, your cervical mucus. You can put it all in here. And basically, the more data that you give this app, it's kind of creepy that I'm giving all this information to this app, I'm just gonna say, but you can also manually just write this down too if that's more your method. And taking charge of your fertility talks a lot about manually entering everything, but I just like using the app. It's much easier for me and it's great. I really like this app. Along with tracking, I do take my temperature every day. This is just a basal body temperature, which means it has more accuracy. It's a more definitive temperature reading on here, and so I do that every single morning. You take that right when you wake up, before you get up, before you move. I literally like reach over and do it because it's more accurate when you do that. And essentially your basal body temperature may increase slightly, typically less than 1/2 of a degree when you ovulate. And for me, mine typically goes down and then peaks, and then when it stays up, that's when you're ovulating. Basically, taking charge of your fertility talks about all this, so I definitely recommend that. But I started doing that a few months ago too, and then also just tracking cervical mucus, which is all that jazz that's going on down there. But I noticed after just regulating my cycle, I go through all of these cervical mucus phases more. Dry and sticky, which is when you're not ovulating. Creamy, when ovulation is coming. When it's wet and watery, which means ovulation is close. And then when you get that egg white-like stretchy consistency, that is the ovulation periods. And that is essentially everything for that fertility awareness method. But I just want to close this out by saying one of the things that I've loved the most about going on this journey, while I've dealt with the highs and the lows, is that I have learned so much about my body, and I just appreciate my body so much more. I appreciate what it does and what our bodies are capable of doing. It is so beautiful. And I feel like often when I was like in 5th grade in health class, it was always something that was kind of seen as this dirty thing, getting your period, like you're gonna have bad cramps, it's gonna be miserable, you have to kind of like cover this up, and how embarrassing it would be if you like leaked on your pants when you're on your period or something. And I hate that. I wish I could go back and just learn that this is such a beautiful thing. That has been the biggest takeaway. And also another big takeaway is that I feel like birth control can often just seem as our problem when you're in a relationship. It's not something that you are kind of both responsible for. But now I feel like Aiden is much more involved in this. He knows about my cycle, and it's kind of something that we both have to be a part of. I feel like it has made us a lot closer. That is everything that I wanted to share. Again, I will have all those resources, articles too, that I quoted to down below if you guys want to check any of those out. And I hope this was helpful. I hope this was not scary. I hope this wasn't shaming. I just wanted to have a conversation about this and encourage you if you are embarking on this journey, thinking about it. Yeah, I just think it's really great that the internet has allowed us to share our experiences on here. So I hope you guys enjoyed this, and I will catch you guys in my next video. Bye, friends.